Recording in progress.
Hello, students. We would be discussing the poem The Mad by K Satchidanandan. First and foremost, we'll take a close look at the introduction of the poem, and then we'll briefly talk about the poet and then move on to discuss the poem at length. Now, the poem Mad is a powerful and compassionate poem that challenges society's conventional understanding of madness, what we understand and what we perceive by the word mad. It's something which is more connected spiritually, it's something which is more ethically pure and imaginative in at the very core, as the poet puts forward. The poem actually also questions various societal norms related to caste, religion, gender, logic, and also time. Temporal understanding is something very crucial to this poem, suggesting that the truth behind this word called madness lies in the very rigid and very insensitive world of the so-called Norman people, of the so-called sane people, and he is sort of delimiting the thought process of how we perceive the world, how to give an alternate understanding of how one should perceive the world. Through rich imagery and philosophical reflection, the poem actually redefines madness as a form of higher perception and innocence. And the poem also portrays the mad people, I mean, people as such, who are living beyond these social divisions, who possess a very, very heightened and a very, very emotional connect with the Supreme Being. There's a much more greater level of spiritual understanding and awareness, and the experience time and reality in a very, very different manner. Their madness is also not chaos. It's almost something which has a very deeper connection with nature and divinity and cosmic truth. The poet also looks at their innocence. The poet looks at their imaginative power with a sort of a moral blindedness of the ordinary society. Now let's take a look at the author. K. Satchidanandan, is a very renowned Indian poet, critic, and translator. He was actually the former secretary of the Sahitya Academy, and he primarily wrote in Malayalam. His poetry is known for its humanistic vision, the social critique, and spiritual depth. And he looks at the various ways, people are marginalized. And as a translator, he brings Indian regional poetry uh, to a larger audience. He looks at the global audience, and the MAD actually reflects his inclusive worldview and resistance to very, very rigid kind of ideologies. Now let's take a look at the summary of the poem. The poet begins by stating that the mad transcend caste, religion, gender, and any sort of, socio-political ideology existing in our societies, and they look at outside these boundaries. They speak a different language, something which is more rooted in an alternate reality, and then their love is quite gentle, very, very unconditional, very luminous, more like a moonlight. They have a different way of perceiving God, different way of interacting with God, a different way of looking at divinity. They find divinity in the smallest of things that we find in our world, that we find in our nature. They look at the souls of insects and see divinity in nature. Though sometimes their visions appear frightening, or sometimes it may also feel very strange, but they perceive beauty and harmony within, not within something which we understand as sane, but something which is beyond human limits. They experience time differently. Temporality is a very important context that K. Satchidanand brings in this poem. It moves beyond the perception of the time, our perception of moving across centuries, moving across religions, faith orders, and even the origin of the universe in moments. The poem concludes by asserting that their madness is fundamentally different from ours. It is more human and spiritually awakened. Now we'll take a look at the major lines. of the poem and look at a more stanza-wise understanding of the poem. The mad have no caste or religion. Madness feels, it feels a very liberating sort of thing. It frees individuals from any sort of social hierarchies or any sort of artificial divisions that we have in our society. We do not deserve their innocence. Society is something morally inferior to the mad who retain purity and compassion. Sometimes, especially in the third line, you'll see their language is not of dreams, but of another reality. Their speech reflects that is perhaps an alternate truth, but that's not an illusion. They see gods we have never heard of. Their spiritual perception exceeds any sort of traditional ways of religious knowledge systems. To move on, there's another beautiful line there. They hold that even flies have souls. This line particularly emphasizes on the radical empathy and reverence for all life forms. The line, they see trees bleed, symbolizes a very heightened sensitivity to the pain and violence which is there associated with environmental degradation, environmental destruction. The line, they alone can hear and sing, suggest a very deeper attunement to nature and hidden harmonies. The tame cyclones can also stop a volcano. This is a metaphor for inner strength and imaginative power. With a whim, they can stop a particular sort of a volcano. This is some sort of an imaginative liberation that they possess. And finally, the last line, the mad are not mad like us. It's a final sort of an ironic reversal. It's society's madness is moral and spiritual. There's a sense of spiritual emptiness in the sane, in the people whom we understand as sane. Now let's take a look at the themes of the poem. The first theme, which is a very prominent one, could be identified as redefinition of madness. Madness is presented as wisdom over here, as liberation over here, as innocence, something which is beyond the perception of the normal people, something which has a heightened awareness of deeper aspects of life, like spirituality, like divinity. There's a critique of social structures. The poem rejects caste, religion, any sort of socio-political, ideology, any sort of rigidity associated with these social constructs. It also talks about the spiritual vision and mysticism. The mad finds divinity and cosmic truth in the ordinary things of life. They perceive life in a very different way, in a very alternative way. Human versus inhuman society. Society is portrayed as morally flawed and compared to compassionate mind. Time and consciousness, as we are reiterating one time and again, explores a very non-linear sort of understanding cosmic time. It's experienced by heightened minds. Ecological sensitivity is also one of the key areas that the poet talks about. There's a respect for all living organism, even insects. The poet sees that the mad people are finding a very deeper relationship and finding even divinity in the smaller insects which are just surrounding us. And it reflects a very deep ecological sense, perception of how we are living and how we are rooted in our nature. And finally, we would like to conclude by saying that it's a very, very deeply philosophical poem that overturns any kind of conventional definition of sanity and insanity, the dichotomy between sanity and insanity. K Satchidanandan also urges readers to reconsider who is actually a mad person, who is actually a unstable person, the spiritually awakened outsider or the rigid, insensitive person who is in the society, in the social construct, living inside social rigid constructs. The poem ultimately celebrates this kind of a free imaginative power. It celebrates the empathy. It looks at various aspects of how we can show more empathy towards our world. And there's a sense of transcendence that we feel throughout the poem, offering madness as a metaphor for moral and spiritual clarity. I hope you understand the deeper meanings associated in this particular poem. Thank you.